Alright, so we are starting with the first video for Unit 8. Unit 8 is all about the United States and American foreign policy. And the question that I want you to keep in mind when we talk about each different section of this unit is, what is the United States' place on the world stage? When I say world stage, I mean, how do other nations consider us? Through each event that we talk about, does that help our the view of the world on the United States? Does it hurt our standing with other nations? Keep that question in mind as we go through each different section in this unit. Now, before we can move forward in anything in this unit, we have to start with defining United States foreign policy, not only what foreign policy is, but what our foreign policy has looked like over time. So first, what the heck is foreign policy? Foreign policy is a government strategy in how to deal with other countries, other nations. So it is what our relationship might be with nations around the world. When we look at this, there are three major parts to foreign policy. There is the economic side of it, where we look at trade regulations, sanctions, which are economic punishments, restrictions for other countries that we might be trying to get to do what we want them to do. And one way to do that is by telling them they can't receive a certain product, or by telling them that no one will trade with them. And then we have embargoes. Think back to Jefferson's embargo. During an embargo, we don't go. No ships leave the United States during Jefferson's embargo. And that is an economic part of foreign policy as well. We also have the military side of foreign policy. This is usually what people think about the first. This is war and the threat of war. That's a huge part of relationships with other nations. Are we going to fight them or not? And then we have diplomatic relations. Diplomatic relations are the peaceful side most times of foreign policy. It's the treaties that we have with other nations. Are they our friend? What does that treaty look like? And then we have recognition. Now, in order to be a nation, other nations have to recognize you and kind of validate your standing. I can't just go to an island and say, this is Miss Neubauer's country. I am president. Everybody do what I say. That's not how that works. You have to have other nations around the world recognize you in order to kind of make your standing real. So diplomatic relations also fall under foreign policy as well. So what are the goals of foreign policy? These are all pretty simple, and what we're going to see as we look at how the United States interacts with other countries, these goals are going to be present in every decision that we make. So first, our number one goal is to preserve the national security of our country, of the United States. Make sure that the nation is safe. We also want to promote world peace and make sure that there is security around the world in that same breath. We want to make sure that nobody else is fighting, because if someone's fighting overseas, we will see in this unit how that affects the United States. We also want to maintain the balance of power with other nations and us, and then between other nations. We don't want people saying, I'm more powerful than you, I'm better than you, because that can lead to conflict, and we don't want to see conflict. We want to work with allies to solve problems around the world. That way, everybody's involved in the conversation. We want to promote democratic values and human rights around the world. So we want everybody to have a democracy where their people are involved in their government, because we believe that is the best kind of government. And we want to make sure that basic human rights are protected. That idea of life, liberty, property, making sure that nobody's life is being taken for no reason, making sure they're protected. And we want to make sure that there's cooperative foreign trade, meaning everybody has the opportunity to trade with whoever they want to trade with. So, who's involved when it comes to foreign policy? There's going to be three major people, government agencies that are involved. First, we have the president. The president can make recommendations to Congress for where foreign aid should go. He cannot tell Congress by themselves that where money should go, but a recommendation can be made. As commander in chief, the president can send troops anywhere they want to around the world, but that is not a declaration of war. That is just sending troops around the world to maybe our allies or wherever to make our presence be known. The president can also sign and negotiate treaties. But notice that the president's power is not all encompassing because the president has to work with Congress on foreign policy. Congress writes and passes bills on foreign aid based on the president's recommendation. Congress has the power to declare war based on where the president wants to send troops. And Congress has to approve all of those presidential treaties with a 2/3 majority. Then the president can sign it. Then the last piece that we have for foreign policy is the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is a part of the cabinet. Remember, the job of the cabinet is to advise the president. It's a piece of the unwritten constitution. It is tradition to have a cabinet with a Secretary of State whose job is to advise the president on foreign policy because the president cannot be everywhere all the time. The Secretary of State makes sure that the president has the information that they need to make decisions. So let's do a little review of foreign policy up until 1898. Foreign policy initially was neutrality. Stay in the middle. Don't pick sides. And this begins because of the French Revolution in 1793, where we see a conflict between the British and the French. The French expected the United States to come in on their side because of the help they gave us during the Revolution, and the British expect us to come in on their side because we were the colonies. But the United States says, nope, we're not going to enter on either side because we are too weak to enter into a war, and the U.S. is going to declare neutrality. That's the first time. We also see neutrality in Washington's farewell address. When Washington was leaving the presidency, he offered that crucial advice to stay away from entangling alliances that could lead us into war overseas. Maybe we should have listened to Washington when he encouraged that idea of staying neutral. But that's going to change. When we see that change the first time is with the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson is going to buy the Louisiana Territory from the French. While when we think of foreign policy, we typically think of war, this is a huge piece of foreign policy because we not only expanded our nation and access to trade so that we could have more interactions with other countries, but we had to negotiate with the French to get that territory. So that doesn't sound very neutral. This, remember, also gives us the constitutional dilemma with Jefferson, who used to be a strict reader of the Constitution, where he said if it's not written in the Constitution, we can't do it. In this moment, he becomes a loose reader of the Constitution, saying, well, the president has the power to negotiate foreign treaties, so I guess this falls into a treaty and we can buy it. And the Louisiana Purchase is one time that we move away from neutrality. While it's a benefit to the United States, it is a move away from neutrality. The next time we move away from that initial neutrality is the War of 1812. Remember, we call this the Second Revolution because the British were not recognizing the United States as an independent nation. President Madison is going to encourage that we go to war against the British to assert that we are separate from them as a response to the impressment of our sailors and that interference with trade when the British were boarding our ships, taking our men, taking our products. This again is a real move away from neutrality. This is the first time that we get into a conflict away from our neutrality stance. So the War of 1812, moving to assert the dominance of the United States to protect the name of the country, make sure that we don't look weak. The next time we see a big piece of foreign policy is the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine was looking to protect Latin America from European powers. Latin America had become independent. They are our neighbor to the south, and we wanted to make sure that once Latin America had broken away from Spain, that Europe does not interfere and try to recolonize those newly independent nations, because it's a heck of a lot easier to have an unorganized, independent Latin America than it is to have European powers who could easily attack us in our neighbor to the south. With the Monroe Doctrine, the United States promised not to get involved in European affairs if Europe remained out of North America and South America. At that point in time, we didn't really have the military might to back it up, but we thought that if we made this promise, that it would stick. Now, another time in the history that we've looked at so far that falls into the category of foreign policy is manifest destiny. Remember, this was the term that we used to say that the United States had this belief that it was our destiny to take control of all of the lands in North America from sea to shining sea. Now, what we had to do to get that land is what makes manifest destiny foreign policy. We had to fight the Mexican American War. We had to negotiate with the British for land. We had to, and the Louisiana Purchase also falls into this category. As we were making the United States look like what we know it as today, we had to form relationships and fight for that land. So manifest destiny falls into the foreign policy of the United States before 1898. Now, next time we come together, we're going to start talking about the Spanish-American War, which is a huge piece in United States foreign policy history where we assert our dominance on the world stage. Don't forget about your homework tonight and let me know of any questions.